Welcome to the JJ Dillon Podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz, and with me, as always, is the star of the show, two-time Wrestling Hall of Famer, the leader of the legendary Four Horsemen, the second greatest manager of all time, a former WWF and WCW executive. He is, of course, James J. Dillon. JJ, how are you doing this evening?
John, I'm doing great. How about you?
I am doing very, very good. This week on the show, it's going to be all about JJ leaving the NWA and heading to the World Wrestling Federation. So, JJ, kind of the first question really is, when you were on your way out of the NWA, was there feelers from Vince as far as, like, there was going to be a landing spot in the WWF if you were to leave the NWA?
Well, they had to be very careful. And, of course, I knew Vince going back to having worked for his father when I was in college, and the timing was such that Crockett, if I memory serves me right, Crockett sold the business, I believe, to the Turner people at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there was a lot of internal concern, anxiety about, what that was going to how it was going to affect each of us individually and collectively with the product. So as it worked out, Terry Garvin had already been in contact with Pat Patterson and prior to that point moved up to New York where he was going to run towns. And Terry and I had always been very close, and he told me that there was definite interest in me up there, but it was one of those deals where they couldn't call me; I would have to call them, and just okay, and was aware of the politics of all of it, and just really waiting for the right time. And then when Turner was selling it, then everybody's status was very much up in the air. And if there was ever a time for me to consider, doing something else, that was really the motivating thing. And it was around the holidays that year, and Lindsay and I had not married yet, and we were going up to New York to do some shopping prior to the holidays. And I was spending a week up there, and I was staying at the Marriott Marquis in Manhattan. And Terry told me that, Vince wanted to meet me, and he couldn't call me because of, worrying about somebody with a lawsuit or something. And so if we were to meet and have a discussion, it would have to be, kept very quiet. So when I went up there, I was in Manhattan. Vince sent a car in to pick me up and took me to his home in Greenwich because there was nobody in his office knew that the two of us were going to meet for my protection, so that if word got out or we couldn't go to his office or no arrangements were made. Just the only one that really knew was his driver, who he had great confidence in his, being able to be confidential about everything. And then that's how it played out. I went up to New York, and Vince sent a car in. I went to the house, and I remember when I got there, he had been doing interviews, and I was there probably 20 minutes before he arrived. He came in, apologized for keeping me waiting, and I told him, "Hey, no, I had no agenda today, and no big deal." And Vince hadn't even stopped to remove his makeup, and that was how it all took place. And so it was several hours for us to get to know each other. And again, he wanted me to meet him there so that no one in his office knew about it. And he did that for my protection, so that no one in Atlanta would know that we talked, and not cause any political problems. And Basically, after a lengthy conversation, he made it clear that he had great interest in me because of my reputation for being a detail person, and that was an area where he felt he needed that somebody with that strength in his office. And he made it clear that he wasn't thinking of me as being an on-air talent, which was fine with me. I'm at that point in my 40s, and it wasn't a question of me, wanting to keep keep on the screen. And the only thing as I said to him as we went on, that I'd done very well financially in Atlanta, and realized that at some point I couldn't be an on-air talent, and that was really where the money was, and so I didn't want to take a big step back financially. And they were able to work out something in terms of an offer that really didn't become an issue. And I told him I just wanted overnight to think about it. Lindsay was up there with me because we were going to go shopping, and I said, this is a great opportunity. A lot of people, dream that they're going to get an opportunity to eventually go to New York, or hope they do. And now here it was, and it was all I had to do was agree to it. And Vince wanted to, he wanted to know, pretty much right away. And so the next morning I said, I'm ready to come on board. And this was like November, and he gave me a starting date, I think around the 1st of February. And I wanted to go back and give reasonable notice to the people in Atlanta rather than just walk out on the spot. And so it was basically the end of my career as an on-air face, and knowing that I was going to go in a different capacity to work with Vince. And I just felt that this was a great opportunity, and it wasn't really a big decision on my part to agree to go for it. And as it worked out, I was there for 7-8 years.
Now, as far as this meeting and everything kind of falling into place, Terry Garvin, the fact that Tully and Arn just left and went to the WWF right before that, does that influence kind of them saying, "Oh, we want you to meet with Vince"? Does Tully and Arn kind of say that, push that along as well? Like, hey, you got us here, try to get JJ.
They, we were. The Horseman thing was not just a publicity thing. We were all very close to each other, genuinely friends, spent time together when we had days off. And so they had already started up there and told me, said, your name has been mentioned a lot, and there's definite interest in you. And they didn't even know that, that I'd been having a conversation with Terry Garvin. So, it just all happened that quick, and I met Vince in his house that one day, and I don't even remember what the conversation was, just a general get-to-know conversation, but he did make it clear that he was interested in me because of my attention to detail, and not as an on-air talent, which I told him that was not an issue with me, that I realized at some point I didn't feel that there was anything left that I personally felt I needed to prove or wanted to do. And if I had an opportunity to go there and work for what was really the top promotion in the profession, I wasn't giving up much of anything at that point. Now, if it had been 10 years earlier, maybe I would have thought that, that on camera would be something that financially that I wouldn't want to give up. But I guess as happened to me so much in my career and in my life in general, just the timing of how things happen for me has always worked out well. And this was a prime example of that.
With Vince meeting you and saying he doesn't want you to be on air, did that strike you as odd? I know you're saying you're in your 40s at this point. You didn't want to. You thought you did everything, but did you think that was odd on his part, considering your history and legendary manager of the Four Horsemen? Did you find that odd at all that wasn't kind of on the table?
I never really thought of it that way, but the answer is definitely no. Again, I'm in my 40s, and as an on-air talent, I didn't think that there was anything left that I needed to prove. As far as being an on-air talent, that just was not a priority for me anymore. And I'm looking at now at the top promoter in the industry, not only nationally but globally. And here's somebody who respects me because of my reputation, my attention to detail, and willing to hire me at very close to what I'd been earning as an on-air talent. And so, can't ask for much more than that.
That is great. And to think, though, that Arn is there, Tully's there, you're eventually going to be there, Barry's going to be there. It is crazy that it never crossed Vince's mind. Like, obviously, you don't have Flair, but it never crossed Vince's mind. Like, maybe I'll put somebody else in there, kind of recreate the Four Horsemen and do his own spin on it. It's just funny, like, when you think back as a fan, you're like, wow, he almost had all the pieces in place to kind of recreate the Horsemen, and he never even, thought of it.
One thing that I found out very quickly about Vince McMahon, and I think I was probably told this by other people in the organization, that Vince never wanted to take something else that had been established somewhere else and bringing into his company. He was interested only in the things that he created himself and built himself, which is why sometimes if somebody came in, he would change names, change the persona. That was a real important sticking point with Vince, that there was never a matter of discussion, because it wasn't what that was definitely what he wasn't interested in. He saw other value in me because of my reputation for being able to manage talent behind the scenes. My personality is such that I could deal with somebody that was high strung and be able to work with them, because I had been at the highest level and been successful. So it wasn't like, that I had to prove anything. And just the fact that Vince saw in me all the qualities that, other than being, an on-air talent, and which was, I guess, it was flattering that he recognized, these other qualities that I had to offer.
As far as leaving the NWA and Turner just bought it and leaving, they had no problems with you leaving. Were they mad you were gone? Obviously, you said you did the right way. You gave notice. But were they upset at all that you were leaving? Did they want you to stay?
Well, the timing was such that Turner was buying it from Crockett. Excuse me. And there was a due diligence process where the people were interviewing everybody with Crockett, almost like a job interview. They're buying the company, and what were they really buying? I guess where there were contracts involved, they would have absorbed those contracts. But I was I'd had a contract, I think, at one point, and it ran out, and having a contract was not important to me. I always had the reputation of my word is my bond, and it wasn't a matter of having a contract and, well, this is what the contract says I have to do, this is what you have to do. It was more about the personal relationships and being comfortable with the people that I was working with. And I mean, I go back to when I was in college and started as a referee. At that time, they were doing a big show once a month in Philadelphia, and Vince Sr. Would come into the big shows once a month. And so I got to know him pretty well. He knew me on a first name basis, called me by my first name, and I had a great relationship with him. And I didn't have that much to do with Vince Jr. because actually Senior sold the company to his son. It wasn't like he gave it to him. And of course, at the time, he had some health issues that I don't think a lot of people knew about, including myself. And but again, I've been so lucky my whole career that as one door closed, another door opened right in front of me.
Were you feeling very comfortable about the move, given the fact that Arn and Tully were there? Would that kind of make it easier for you?
I can't. That was not it was not. I mean, it was nice because I know that I would get to see him, and I had a genuine friendship with him. But it wasn't like I was looking for a comfort level. I'd known Terry Garvin for a long time, met Pat through Terry, and got to be friends with Pat. And I guess it was confidence in my own ability and what I had to offer. And again, I'm in my 40s and realizing that as an on-air talent, you could continue to do that, especially not as an in-ring wrestler, but in other capacities. That age was not. It wasn't like I'd reached the end of the rope. It's the end of the rope. Well, I have to do something because Father Time. I could have continued to do what I had been doing for quite some time. So when it was made clear that they were hiring me because of my reputation, my attention to detail, and this is an area in which they were lacking, so I made it clear that I had no issue with the fact that I was not going to be an on-air talent. And it was, I would go, once I started with him, to TVs and things, or I would go to the big shows in the Garden, but I would go to TV and, like fans would see me and not know, what was going on behind the scenes unless they, read certain newsletters or something, and they would see me and say, "Oh, wow, what are you doing here?" And they were surprised, but I was very comfortable with the situation. And it's just that simple. I was very comfortable with it, very comfortable with working with Vince. And we got along well right from day one.
When you first initially start, what is the job title? What is the job entail?
Well, for the first, they didn't really give me a title, and I ended up being a senior vice president for talent relations. So they gave me a title, but that wasn't important to me. I would never raise the issue. Well, it was obvious that I was reporting direct to Vince and direct to Pat. But I wasn't worried about having a title. I really wasn't. And I was very comfortable being there. And I had moved to Dallas because Crockett at one point talked about moving to Dallas, and he was going to make movies, and so they had relocated me from Charlotte to Dallas. So I bought a home in Dallas, and then said that they would move me, pay for my moving and everything, and from Dallas to Connecticut. And initially I was going to rent, which I did, and take my time to make sure everything was what it appeared to be, and then eventually put down roots, which I did. I moved to Wilton, which was north of Stanford, and really a small community, but excellent school system. And that's eventually where I bought a home. But they were when it came time to buying a home, I remember, because up there everything was zoned for 2 acres, and the home values, like in Wilton, Connecticut, were very pricey. And I remember Vince brought the chief financial officer in and told him, he said, whatever he wants to do, just make it happen. And I told him initially I want to rent and then find the right place and then buy. And they made it clear, when the time comes, you work through us. And because in the wrestling business, moving around, you don't have, especially with a purchase like you would need to buy in Wilton, Connecticut. The credit might be an issue, and they said that no, not a problem. I'd work through their bank, and they would make everything happen, which they did.
Now, Jim Ross has said it. I know a lot of other people have said it as well. Connecticut is an overpriced hellhole. Do you kind of agree with that?
Well, everything in Wilton, like in the Wilton area, which was a small town and a really nice school district, everything was priced. Everything was zoned 2 acres to start with, and everything starting prices were in the 200,000 range and up. That was the bottom end, and you're talking about maybe a home that wasn't even a brick home, and so it was like a different world up there. That the values of land and prices of homes were outrageous, and so I wanted to wait, and of course I had kids with Lindsay, and had kids from my other marriage, and they were going to be there and go to school, and so I was very pleased with that Wilton had such an excellent school system, and it just everything fell in place for me. I ended up buying a house there, and they made it possible for me to make the purchase.
They say, and you kind of said it before as well, that so many people dream of working for the WWF. They want to work for Vince McMahon, and there's more money in it. Was that really something on your mind that you're like, man, I always got to get there. I always want to work there. I always want to be a part of that? Or was that just one of those things where, like you said, it worked out perfectly, but really it is the best situation?
Yeah, it wasn't like of me wanting to get into a situation where just everything in my whole career, my whole life has been something where things just fell in place for me. And I can be very flexible. My needs are very simple. And Lindsay and I had been together and wanting to get married. And we were there almost a year, and we're married in Wilton, and ended up buying we had rented a home. And when I told Vince I wanted to buy a home, he called Doug Sages, who's the chief financial officer, and he said, I was renting and wanted to buy, and because the prices were whatever they were, and he said, I'm going to tell him to call you, and it was like Vince just said, whatever you got to do, make it happen. So it wasn't a question of, how was I going to come up with a sizable down payment that was necessary. They made me feel very, very comfortable, which was, you could say, well, you worked hard all your career, and your reputation was something that you earned, but that's not a guarantee that, especially in this business, that you're always going to be rewarded for that. But again, Vince was very, very kind to me. He really was. And we would be in the office Monday through Friday, a shirt and tie, and I would go to the garden sometimes, and then I would go to TVs, and then all of the creative was basically done at Vince's home in Greenwich on the weekends. So it was really a 7-day-a-week job. And it was never, I shouldn't say it worked out that way, because it was like Friday afternoon, Pat would say to Vince, well, what do you want to do for the weekend? And he'd say, well, why don't you guys come by tomorrow? And it was an informal thing. And we would go in the summer months and sit out by Vince had a pool adjacent to the home, a beautiful home in Greenwich. And he had like a cabana on the other side away from the house around the pool, covered, and he had a bank of phones out there. And in the warm months, that's where we would work. We would work out there. And then when it got cooler, which was not that long a period of time, we would work in the house, sitting in Vince's formal dining room. And, it would work late hours. And, Vince would just say, well, have dinner with the family. So quite often I would sit there, and Mary, the housekeeper, was an excellent cook, and I was just very comfortable there. Vince made me very comfortable, and I have real good thoughts about that period of time. I was there, like I say, almost 7 years.
As far as Vince and bringing you in, when you initially started talking, did he say anything about Crockett and killing the NWA, or it dying off and Turner buying it? Were any of those conversations happening where he's kind of talking to you about your previous or going to be previous employer?
No, never asked any questions, made any comments. And my attitude was, if whoever signs my check has 100% of my loyalty, my attention, my work ethic, and everything. And even to the point that I didn't even watch the Turner television show. I would occasionally see it, and I would hear who was on and what they were doing. But I always wanted to look at the person I was working for, the talent that was there under the roster, and what's the best thing that you can do for his business without ever getting in the situation where you make decisions that are in reaction to what your quote unquote competition is doing. I just never did that.
As far as with Crockett and the NWA, did you foresee that happening kind of leading up? Like, obviously, you're the assistant booker, you're working backstage, you kind of see them spending money like crazy, maybe buying a plane and maybe buying 2 planes, things like that. Did you kind of foresee, like, okay, this is going to go downhill?
What happened was Crockett sold to Turner, and that was the only time of, I don't even want to say anxiety, but uncertainty about what was going to happen, because the Turner people did their due diligence, lengthy interviews with everybody, and especially, at my level, I was one of the last that they interviewed, and it was really in depth. And I had confidence in my own ability, and confidence because I had worked for so many different promoters around the country, and if you're working for Eddie Graham in Florida, the type of television show he produced, the attention to credibility of the champions, of being legitimate, like everything was built around like Jack Briscoe, and you had Hiro Matsuda there, and yet it was different around Kansas City, or like I never really worked Nashville full time, but it was crazy there compared to what Vince was doing or what Eddie was doing in Florida. So the term wrestling has a real broad range of, if you say, well, what is wrestling? It's hard to explain what wrestling is. You can watch an hour of championship wrestling from Florida and have one impression, and then you can watch the Sheik's TV for an hour and have a whole, different impression. And really, I could adapt to either. Excuse me.
And as far as Crockett and all that other stuff, did you think at that point, though, that like it was a sinking ship? It's almost like I'm glad I'm out of there when you kind of like look back at it.
My analysis was pretty much, because I had started full time on the road when Jim Crockett Sr. was still alive, and at that point it was just the original Charlotte territory that was North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, with Joe Murnick up in Norfolk where they were partners, and then a few towns over in West Virginia. And, cable television changed everything. And the players came down to very few that had to be in a position to adapt and promote on a national basis or on a global basis. And what was interesting about Crockett was, again, going back to Jim Sr., it would have been a family thing for several generations. And when they all of a sudden weren't just talking about the Mid-Atlantic area being mainly Charlotte and South Carolina and Virginia, and now they're talking about going global. And what I found was that the Crockett's were very loyal to the people that were part of them, and most of the people that worked in the office were people that had been back with them from when Jim Sr. was alive. And it grew so big, so fast. The only thing I kind of had, and it wasn't a concern that I verbally talked about with anybody there, but it's like they became so big so fast that did they really have the infrastructure to be able to adapt to basically being Mid-Atlantic area. Now we're global. And but all in all, they did well, and there were great people there to work for and to work with. And again, like I say, I was there 7 years.
Yeah, the thing is, it's crazy that they went from kind of, like you said, the Mid-Atlantic area, or the surrounding areas, and then they kind of go global. They go big. They start traveling all over the place. They're flying here, they're flying there. It's just crazy that they did that. But it is perfect for you that you kind of did get out at the right time. You end up with Vince. You end up in the WWF. And you mentioned kind of, meeting with Vince and everything worked out as far as money-wise you were good with. Was that a tough negotiation with Vince at all? Because, you always hear things about Vince. He's tough. He's this. He's very stern. It's his way or the highway. Is it one of those things where he's a tough guy to negotiate with, or are you really technically not even negotiating with him to begin with?
All my business was with him, and we talked first about just in general about what he was, why he was bringing me in, not as an on-air talent. He was growing, and he wanted somebody that I had a college education, and somebody that like I had a reputation for my attention to detail, and that really is what they were looking for. And so I just, again, it was the right place, the right time for me. And that's pretty much it. And of course, Crockett then sold out to Turner, and I already kind of knew, because Terry Garvin had gone up to New York, had mentioned that they had definitely had interest in me. So whatever was going to happen with Crockett selling to the Turner people, if it was a radical change in everything or whatever, I already knew that I was heading in another direction. And so I really, wasn't concerned. We're going to work for Vince. Again, here's at that point, as talent, that's where everybody eventually wanted to be. Wanted to be work in Madison Square Garden every month.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about that territory was most of the other territories would have a major town. Even in Florida, Tampa was good, but Miami was the major town. Tampa was good, Jacksonville was good, but Miami was the major town. Dallas and Fort Worth were the major towns. The territories all kind of had a major town, and then other towns in partnership with local promoters, is because you needed to have guys working 6-7 days a week, and to be able to have them earn what they needed to be to make it attractive, and for them to come in and to be able to make a commitment and stay there for a while.
So when you start really kind of in February of '89 and you're working your way through and you're kind of working backstage, any resentment from any of the guys, given that you're kind of a quote-unquote Crockett guy or an NWA guy, and you're coming in there and you get a pretty prominent role in a pretty prominent position? Any resentment from the guys?
Not that I was aware of, but there was one little situation, and I had been very close to Andre the Giant. When I was in Amarillo, when I was in other territories, and he was barnstorming where he would come into depending on the size of the territory, anywhere from a week to 3 weeks. And invariably, I would have him over to my home to cook a home-cooked meal for him. And I thought that I had, a really a good relationship with him. And Vince was always up front. There was no things going on behind and things said about. He was very upfront, which I have great respect for him for that. But he told me that it shocked a lot of people when I was hired to go to New York, and Andre was there at the time, and because my background had been so closely associated with the National Wrestling Alliance territories. Vince told me one day, he said, Andre came to him, and again, Andre would go to other territories, but Vince is the one that booked him out. And he said, Andre came to him, he said, I just want you to know, because we don't have any secrets around here. He said, Andre said, you sure that you're good with hiring this guy? Because he's been so strongly associated with the NWA. You have any reservations at all? And Vince said, no, I'm very comfortable with hiring him, and whatever contact I've had with him so far, he's everything that I heard about him, and I'm glad that we were able to get him. Vince then, made it a point to share that conversation with me about Andre, and he said, I just want you to know that Andre came to me and said, hey, he's one of those NWA guys. You sure that you want him here? And we laughed about it. And I don't know if Andre ever even knew that Vince shared that with me, but that's how Vince was. He didn't want behind the scenes maneuvering, secrets, that kind of thing. And we just laughed about it, and it didn't affect my relationship with Andre, because I understood why Andre said it, because basically I had worked my whole career in the South and with the NWA, and now I'm in a different territory. And even though I was born and raised in New Jersey, I was originally from that area. But that's how Vince was. He was very, very open about everything and no secrets. And I never had a discussion with Andre. And Vince told Andre, and this is what Vince told me. He said, "No, I know about his background, and and I've looked him over, and I've met him, and very comfortable, and he's everything that I've heard about him, and I want him for his attention to detail, and he's going to be an asset to my company." And it was never mentioned again.
ever any issue with Andre at all after that? Any conversations where it seemed a little awkward or anything like that?
No. And I understood where Andre was coming from, because Vince is the one that, when he was basically Vince's property, and back in the territory days, Vince would book him out through Jim Barnett, to come to Calgary for a week or 2 weeks, or be there for Stampede Week, and a couple weeks here and a couple weeks there. So I understood, Andre's unique situation. And, he just, and it wasn't because there was ever any attention with Andre. Like I said, every territory that he ever came into, I want to make it a point to have him come to the house one day for a meal. And he's, appreciated that.
As far as Vince and Andre and guys like that, ever any other kind of issues with any of the guys besides Andre? Like where maybe Vince would tell you something, or maybe Vince is telling you that for a reason? It was, was there any other issues as far as that?
Not that I'm aware of. And I think the point that Vince was making was he didn't want anybody to have hidden agendas that nobody knew about, or that something would come around where you would have to go back to Vince and say, Vince, I heard this. Oh, yeah, I wasn't going to mention it. Vince was very open and above board about everything. And like, when Andre said something, I think Andre had been booked by Vince for so long and had done so well financially. And he just made a comment that because my whole career had been in the South, he just made a comment to Vince about, that's where he's been his whole career. Are you sure that this is what you wanted to do in hiring him? And there was no malice. There was no issue with Andre at the time. It just something was said, and Vince's policy was, we don't have any secrets. I want you to know. I don't want you to have an issue. Go back to Andre and say, hey, why did you say this? I just want you to be aware that conversation took place. And that's how it was handled. And I like that, because that gives you a comfort level in dealing with somebody like Vince, of knowing that that's his policy.
When you first started, you kind of were working backstage, agenting, but then you say you were the senior vice president of talent relations. What is the senior vice president of talent relations?
That's a good question. I don't know. I didn't have business cards, and I wasn't somebody that was into titles. And where I started as a wrestler at almost 28 years old, full time. It was like February in Charlotte when I started, and that June I turned 28. So I wasn't a kid. And I then knew that if I was going to have longevity in the industry, which is obviously what I wanted to do, that my days as a talent on air, on screen, were numbered because of my age. I'm in my 40s already. So from day one, I was interested in all facets of promotion. I wanted to know how the towns were scheduled. I wanted to know about how television was put together. Because when you're an individual wrestler, you're worried about one person, and that's your career. And you more often than not, don't focus on the big picture of how it's all put together. And doing a television show, you have to have, in other words, you wouldn't want to open up on a 2-hour show and have the first 4 segments be tag team matches. You break it up, and styles of matches, and the various characters and so forth. So this was all part of my learning curve to understand the big picture, and to be as knowledgeable as I could possibly be, so that I could be most effective.
So as far as talent relations, it does seem like you're well prepared to handle that job and do that job. So what does Vince tell you about it? Like, you're the liaison between himself and the talent. They got to go through you before they get to Vince.
Yeah. I mean, Hulk did all of his business with Vince. But everybody else, Vince would have had no time if he had an open door that nobody could do business unless they did it with Vince. So he wanted people, and Pat was a great example because Pat had been everywhere. He could talk to a talent, and Pat had been a main eventer for Shires. He'd been a main eventer in Minneapolis. And so Pat could, and like every time at WrestleMania, they would have the main event match. And for a month prior to the actual WrestleMania event, Pat basically would take the two guys that were in the main event. They would find an obscure place somewhere where they had access to a gym and a ring, and they would fine-tune that match over a period of a couple of weeks, so there was nothing left to chance when the WrestleMania event itself came. So there was a purpose in everything that was done, and Pat was to me the brightest guy that I have ever worked with in my career, because he had done it all. He'd been a main eventer, like I say, every place he'd ever been. And yet he was respected by talent. He could set up matches. He could do everything. And one of the true greats in our industry.
What did you think about Hogan going directly to Vince, talking with Vince? Was that anything where you were like, maybe he should come to me, or you knew he had such prestige and he was so high in the card that maybe just going to Vince, or maybe is that even an edict from Vince that, hey, anybody else goes to you, Hogan comes right to me?
No, it just was understood. It wasn't like laid out. Well, this is how it is. Just that, and I got a lot of direction from Pat. Pat was extremely helpful to me, and it was clear right away that anything that Vince had, Hulk would go direct to Vince. And a lot of times, talent wouldn't see Vince or be accessible to Vince unless it was at the Garden or at TV. And so there was always a waiting list of guys that wanted to see Vince, a multitude of issues. And so you would manage that in terms of setting up time, and and say, Vince, this guy wants to talk to you. And it just was a very informal system that worked out well, and it was never a question, well, find out what he wants to talk to me about. It just worked out. As I look back and think about it, I don't know. I know that the only one who could go direct to Vince was Hulk.
Seems like that is such a crazy job as far as like managing and dealing with the talent. I don't think people realize how many wrestlers were in the WWF at that point, or how many issues pop up, or money pops up, or the house was down, what was this, or the house was up, or all these different things that could arise and it could pop up. How many of them wanted to speak to Vince on a daily basis? Because it seemed like not only would you be inundated just with these requests, but it seems like Vince is almost like too busy to be dealing with everybody, but it seems like everybody's got problems, issues, and questions.
Yeah, and you would screen a lot of things. So you want to talk to Vince, is there a problem? Is what's going on? Well, something about something, or there was also a situation where certain guys got rental cars paid for, and you couldn't have a blanket thing that everybody got it. So it was like something that you had to be of a certain level and a certain status to even consider for that to happen. And I was involved more with things like that, finding out what problems there were, or what was going on, and so that Vince didn't have to handle every little detail. And if you just through experience, whether this is something that this guy's not going to be satisfied until, even if it's a 5-minute conversation with Vince to put his mind at ease or whatever. And I could tell Vince, that I've talked to him and worked out this, worked out that, but he just wants 5 minutes with you, whether it's just some of them just, I think it had to do a lot of times with them feeling that they were important enough that Vince could give them 5 minutes, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, almost like an insecurity thing, like, I'm not important, but if you give him, I must be important, Vince is going to give me the time. Or they don't even think like, that's a crazy.
But at the same time, you're having to filter out and be able to tell Vince, hey, I talked to this guy, I worked at this, did this for him, but he's, and so every now and then it's like, it's something whether it's just for peace of mind to know that they were important enough to get 5 minutes with Vince.
Definitely. And I feel like rental cars, hotels, lowball on pay, all this other stuff could be looked at as very bad and very negative. Were you like the heel, if you will, like the villain, Vince is good cop, you're bad cop? Was that the way you guys kind of handled it?
Probably to a degree. I did payroll, and it was done by towns, and you pretty well know by a card who drew what, and I could watch the pay sheets from prior events and pretty well figure a pattern of what Vince's thinking was. And I could take a show, and obviously if you run White Plains and you got a $20,000 house, well, there's only so much money and you're going to pay a higher percentage. The general rule, I think, was like talent would get like 25% of whatever the gross or net was. And smaller houses had to be a greater percentage just because you needed to make the guys weak so that the pay at the end of the week, kept peace and harmony in the crew. And the bigger the houses, like the Garden, the smaller the percentage was. The guys got great payoffs, but percentage of what the gross was, because of the size of the venue and the size of the pay that the office was getting, was a lower. So you couldn't go just by always a percentage. You had a percentage for most of the places that you would go by, and sometimes if a house didn't do well, you had to throw that theory out the window and give the guys a decent payday, even if the office didn't make much money on a given town. Being a talent was the biggest thing for me, experience-wise, to enable me to do the job the way Vince wanted. And every now and then, it's funny. It was like, I remember once with Randy Savage. It was, and I would do the pay-per-views too. And there was a pay-per-view that Randy was one of the feature matches. And I remember that in doing the payroll, I just giving you examples, I put down for Randy a payoff of like $15,000. And I would do a preliminary payroll, which Vince would look it over. Sometimes he would just, okay. and at other times he would look at it. And in that one particular case, he took the $15,000 that I'd given Randy because I thought that he was an important part of drawing in that house, and I think Vince cut it down to 10. So when the checks come out, Randy got the 10. He was really upset and wants to talk to Vince, goes to see Vince, and it's like Vince would say, well, I didn't really look at. I don't know what JJ was thinking when he put that down. I can understand. Truth. He'd say, I was always the, yeah. So Vince would look at it, and he would end up giving him, he would tell me to write Randy a check for another $5,000. So here was a house that I looked at, and I thought that Randy should get $15,000. I put 15 on the preliminary thing that went to Vince. Vince cut it line through 15 and put 10. Randy went screaming to Vince. Vince turned and said, give Randy $5,000 more, back to the 15 that I'd originally put down. But
that's great.
It was like, well, I don't know what JJ was thinking. So it just is how it was. And I never took it personal. It was just the way the system was. And Vince was the final say in everything. And it would never even cross my mind to say, well, Randy, I put you down 15 originally myself, and then Vince cut it to 10. No, you can't. That's a no-win situation when you start thinking that way or manage your position in that way. It was like I put down 15, Vince reduced it to 10. Randy went screaming to Vince. Vince says, I don't know what JJ was thinking. I'll take a second look at it, talk to JJ, give him another $5,000. So I'm not going to go to Randy and say, well, Randy, I originally had you down for 15 anyway, but Vince cut it to 10. No, I'm always going to be Vince could never take the fault for anything that wasn't good and took credit for everything that was good. It just was how the system, and that was my job, and I was able to do it and never lose sleep over it or never, it just, I'm not patting myself on the back, but at that role, I just was good at it.
Vince ever wink at you, hey, Randy maybe not looking, wink at you yeah, JJ said whatever, that it was less. So, kind of blaming you, but kind of winking at you, telling you, obviously, it's really him changing it on the guys.
No, it wasn't. And that there was never any game where, if the sheet came out, I put down 15, Vince cut it to 10. Randy screams at Vince. Vince meets with him, and okay, he'll have me write him another check for 5. The whole system would have tore down if I had gone to Randy and said, well, Randy, I originally had you down for that, but Vince cut it. Well, like I say, it's back to Vince is going to take credit for everything that's good, and and never takes the heat for anything that isn't. And that's I'm the heat-seeking missile in that job, and I understand that. And it's not personal; it's just business. And I think that's why I survived as long as I did in the industry.
It was like an understood thing that Vince gets the credit and you get the blame.
Yeah. And don't take it personal.
That is kind of a tough job if you think about it, because the guys sometimes are going to get mad at you. I mean, obviously sometimes they're going to be happy with you, but they're going to get mad at you a lot. And
it's a job that I don't think that everybody can do. And I'm fortunate that I had the confidence in my own ability, and I had the ability because I had been a talent. That was another factor. I'd been a talent for many, many years in big territories, small territories, worked on top. And so I understood the structure of the business and was able to adapt working for Vince. And I knew that under no circumstances was Vince going to take the heat for anything. That's what he's paying me for. And if talent gets mad at me, it isn't going to affect my job security because I'm doing what Vince wants me to do, and I keep my mouth shut.
Makes perfect sense. And
the thing is, it's not a perfect thing because I could do, like if let's say a house that same size. If I put down 15, Vince cuts it to 10. Randy screams at Vince. Vince comes back and does 15. It's not a perfect thing, and I was right with what Vince's thinking was more often than not. A lot of times he would just initial it and then just scan over it, and other times it was like he would make a change just because. And it wasn't to make a point to me, but just he had the power to do it. And it's and it's like when something like that happened, I would never go to Randy and say, Randy, I already had you down for 15 initially, and Vince scratched it and put 10, and now you went to him and you get 5 more. Randy got his money, and there's no way that I'm ever going to go to Randy. I'm going to let Randy be mad at me for figuring that I tried to compensate him less than what he deserved, and the fact that he went to Vince and I can't tell Randy, I put you down for 15 initially. Vince cut it to 10. You went to Vince, and Vince took a second look at it and said, okay, give him 5 more. So in other words, Vince is always going to take the credit for everything that's good, and he's never going to have any heat on him for anything that's not. That's why I'm there.
Yep. And another guy that was there around that time, which is crazy to think about it, but the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, is in the WWF at that point. Were you shocked when that happened?
No. And there was one thing I don't even remember what it was about. That because when I was in Florida, basically I reported to Dusty for a period of time, and now I'm working for Vince. Vince brings Dusty in, and I don't remember the specifics of what it was, but it ended up with a meeting with Vince, Dusty, and myself. With Dusty had an issue about something, and Dusty kind of threw it out there. Well, he worked for me, and boy, Vince jumped on that with both feet and said, basically kind of put Dusty in his place in that one situation and said, he was behind me 100%. And Dusty then backed off. And that only happened that one time, I think. So it wasn't like Vince, to be there for 7 years. It's a business that is unique and unlike anything else. And my experience in the business at all levels and my temperament, my personality, allowed me to be able to work in that role and be able to go home at the end of the day and be able to leave it at the office and not take anything personal and because of that, I kept the job for 7 years, went to work for Turner and was there for 7 years. Same thing. So it was, I guess, my temperament suited me for that job, which meant I had to go with the flow, good times and bad times. And I guess I managed to always have job security.
And I think that is the perfect kind of stopping point and ending point